They thought inheriting a mountain cabin meant they'd finally have a roof over their heads. But what Margaret and Thomas Reed found buried beneath those ancient floorboards was $260 million in secrets their family had been hiding for over a century. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, slipped under the door of the cramped one-bedroom apartment where Margaret and Thomas Reed had been living for the past 3 years. Margaret almost stepped on it when she shuffled to the kitchen in her worn slippers, the ones with the hole near the big toe that she kept meaning to replace but never did, because $30 slippers felt like a luxury when you were counting pennies for groceries. She bent down with a soft grunt, her knees protesting the movement, and picked up the cream-colored envelope. It was thick, official-looking, with a return address from a law firm in Boulder, Colorado. Caldwell & Associates, attorneys at law. Her heart did that little skip. It always did when official mail arrived, the kind that usually meant bad news, bills, or worse. Thomas was already awake, sitting at their small kitchen table with a mug of instant coffee, staring at the stack of unopened envelopes they'd been avoiding all week. At 72 years old, he still had the broad shoulders of the factory worker he'd been for 43 years, but now they sagged with the weight of worry that had become their constant companion. His pension check barely covered rent, and Margaret's part-time job at the Madison County Library brought in just enough for food and utilities if they were careful. "What's that?" he asked, looking up as Margaret walked in. "Don't know yet," she said, sliding her finger under the seal. "Looks official." She pulled out the letter and unfolded it slowly, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Thomas watched her face shift from confusion to disbelief, her mouth opening slightly. "What is it?" he pressed, setting down his coffee. Margaret's hands trembled as she read aloud. "Dear Mrs. Margaret Louise Reed, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Harrison William Reed, who died on August 14th of this year at the age of 97. She paused, looking at Thomas. "Harrison Reed? Do we know a Harrison Reed?" Thomas squinted, thinking. "Harrison, wasn't that my father's brother? The one who left Illinois back in the 1940s? "I thought he died years ago," Margaret said, looking back at the letter. She continued reading. "As Mr. Reed's only surviving relatives, you and your husband, Thomas James Reed, have been named as beneficiaries of his estate, which includes a property located at 4200 Pine Ridge Road, Silver Creek, Colorado." She stopped, the words catching in her throat. They sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the old refrigerator the only sound in the apartment. "A property?" Thomas finally said. "He left us a property?" Margaret kept reading, her voice barely above a whisper. "The property consists of a historic cabin built in 1887 on approximately 12 acres of forested mountain land. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of the deed and discuss the estate." Thomas stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the parking lot of their apartment complex. A property, land, something they'd never owned in their entire lives. They'd raised 3 children in rentals, moved 17 times in 49 years of marriage, always one bad month away from eviction. And now, out of nowhere, a dead uncle he barely remembered had left them a cabin in Colorado. "This has to be a mistake," he said quietly, "or a scam." Margaret shook her head, still holding the letter. "It's on law firm letterhead, Thomas. There's a phone number, an address. This looks real." "Why would he leave it to us? We never even met the man." "Maybe," Margaret said slowly, "maybe we were all he had left." That afternoon, Margaret called the number on the letter. A receptionist answered, professional and warm, and connected her to Mr. Benjamin Caldwell himself. He confirmed everything. Harrison Reed had indeed passed away peacefully in his sleep at a care facility in Boulder. He'd had no children, no close friends, and his only living relatives were Thomas and Margaret. The cabin was theirs, free and clear, no mortgage, no liens. It just needed someone to claim it. "I have to be honest with you, Mrs. Reed," Mr. Caldwell said over the phone. "The property is quite remote. It hasn't been occupied in several years, and it will likely need significant repairs. Your uncle was a very private man, somewhat of a recluse in his later years. But the land itself is valuable, and the structure, while old, was built with remarkable craftsmanship." Margaret thanked him, hung up, and immediately called Thomas, who was at the hardware store looking for work. When she told him what the lawyer said, he was silent for so long she thought they'd been disconnected. "Thomas?" "I'm here," he said. "I'm just trying to understand why this is happening now. We've been struggling for so long, and now this." "Maybe," Margaret said softly, "maybe we're finally due for some good luck." They told their children that evening. David, their oldest at 48, was skeptical. "Sounds too good to be true, Mom. You sure this isn't some kind of scam? People target seniors with stuff like this." Lisa, their middle child at 45, was more optimistic. "Oh my God, a cabin in Colorado? That could be worth serious money. You could sell it, get yourselves into a decent place." Their youngest, Sarah, 42 and living in California, was the most emotional. "You deserve this, Mom. You and Dad have worked so hard your whole lives. Finally, something good." But none of them offered to help, to come with them, to make the trip. They all had their own lives, their own struggles, their own families to worry about. Margaret understood, but it still stung a little. 2 weeks later, Margaret and Thomas loaded everything they could fit into their 1998 Honda Civic and started the drive from Madison, Wisconsin to Silver Creek, Colorado. It was a journey of just over 900 miles, and they took it slow, stopping at cheap motels along the way, eating gas station sandwiches and splitting sodas to save money. As they drove west, the landscape changed. Flat farmland gave way to rolling hills, then gradually to something more dramatic. By the time they crossed into Colorado, the mountains rose before them like ancient sentinels, snow-capped peaks touching clouds, pine forests stretching endlessly in every direction. Thomas gripped the steering wheel tighter as they climbed higher into the mountains, the roads narrowing, the air growing thinner. Margaret navigated with a paper map the lawyer had mailed them, her finger tracing the route to Silver Creek, a town so small it barely registered as a dot. They arrived in Silver Creek just before sunset on the third day of driving. The town consisted of one main street with a gas station, a general store, a post office, and a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. A hand-painted sign welcomed them to Silver Creek, population 347, elevation 8,200 feet. "This is it," Margaret said, looking around. Thomas pulled into the gas station. An older man in coveralls was closing up for the day. Thomas rolled down his window. "Excuse me, sir. We're looking for Pine Ridge Road." The man walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at them with the kind of cautious curiosity small-town folks reserved for strangers. "Pine Ridge? That's about 6 miles up the mountain. You folks lost?" "We're here to claim a property," Margaret said. 4200 Pine Ridge Road. The man's eyebrows shot up. "You're talking about the old Reed place?" "You knew our uncle?" Thomas asked. "Harrison Reed." "Knew of him," the man said. "Hermit type, kept to himself. Nobody's been up to that cabin in, must be 4-5 years now, maybe more. You related?" Thomas nodded. "He was my uncle, left us the property." The man whistled low. "Well, I'll be. That place has been sitting up there forever. Folks around here, we always wondered what was going on up at old Harrison's cabin. Some said he was crazy. Others said he was sitting on something valuable. Guess you'll find out." He pointed up the road. "You're going to want to take the turnoff just past mile marker 12. Road's going to get rough, real rough. You got four-wheel drive?" Thomas looked at their Civic and shook his head. The man frowned. "You might want to wait till morning. Get someone with a truck to take you up. That road's not meant for regular cars, especially not in the dark." But they'd come too far to wait another night. Thomas thanked him, bought a flashlight and some batteries, and they continued up the mountain. The paved road gave way to gravel, then to dirt rutted with potholes and washed-out sections. The Civic bounced and scraped, branches scraping the sides. Margaret gripped the door handle, her heart in her throat, as Thomas navigated hairpin turns with steep drop-offs on one side and sheer rock faces on the other. "Maybe we should turn back," she said. "We're almost there," Thomas replied, though he had no idea if that was true. Then, just as the last light was fading from the sky, they saw it. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches creating a natural cathedral. It was larger than they'd expected, a two-story structure built from massive logs and stone, with a steep pitched roof and a wide front porch that wrapped around the side. The wood had weathered to a silvery gray, and moss grew on the north-facing side, but the structure stood solid and strong, defiant against time. Thomas stopped the car, and they both sat in silence, staring. "It's beautiful," Margaret whispered. They got out slowly, their legs stiff from the drive. The air was crisp and cold, so much thinner than what they were used to. The silence of the mountains pressed around them, broken only by the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a bird. Thomas pulled out the keys the lawyer had sent, 3 of them on an old brass ring, and they walked up the stone path to the front porch. The steps creaked under their weight, but held firm. He tried the first key in the lock. It stuck, then turned with a heavy click that seemed to echo through the forest. The door swung open on hinges that groaned in protest. The smell hit them first, musty and closed in, the scent of a place that hadn't seen fresh air in years. Margaret found a light switch just inside the door and flipped it. Nothing happened. "Power's probably been shut off," Thomas said. He clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a large main room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, massive hand-hewn beams crossing the ceiling, and furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beam. They moved through the room slowly, pulling back sheets to reveal antique furniture, solid oak pieces that would fetch good money at any auction. The walls were lined with built-in bookcases filled with old volumes, their leather spines cracked with age. "Thomas, look at this!" Margaret called from across the room. She was standing in front of a wall covered in framed photographs. Thomas joined her, shining the light across the images. There was Harrison as a young man, stern-faced in a suit and tie, standing in front of what looked like a bank. Another showed him older, maybe in his 50s, with a group of men in front of the same cabin they were standing in now. More photos showed the cabin being built, massive logs being hoisted, stone being set. 1887, Margaret read from a small plaque beneath one photo. Original construction. They moved to the kitchen, where an old wood-burning stove sat cold and dark. The counters were clean, everything put away neatly, as if Harrison had simply walked out one day and never came back. In the sink, a single coffee cup. Upstairs, they found 3 bedrooms, each simply furnished but well built. The master bedroom had a 4-poster bed made from logs, a handmade quilt folded at the foot. On the nightstand sat a pair of reading glasses and a leather-bound book. Margaret picked up the book. It was a journal, Harrison's handwriting filling the pages in careful script. She opened to a random page and read, March 7th, 1973. Another winter passes. The solitude grows heavier, but the purpose remains clear. What I protect here must outlast me. The family will understand when the time comes. She showed it to Thomas. What do you think he meant by that? Thomas shook his head. I don't know, but it sounds like he was protecting something. They continued exploring, finding more journals in drawers, on shelves, tucked into corners. Harrison had been a meticulous record keeper, documenting everything from weather patterns to his daily routines, to philosophical musings about wealth, family, and legacy. In one journal from 1948, he'd written, "Left Chicago today. Couldn't stomach what the banks were becoming, what we'd all become. The crash taught me nothing lasts except what you can hold in your hands, what you can hide from the greedy world. Colorado will be my refuge. I'll build something real here, something that matters." It was getting late, and they were exhausted. They found bedding in a cedar chest, musty but usable, and made up the bed in the master bedroom. As they lay in the darkness, the old cabin settling around them with creaks and groans, Margaret reached for Thomas's hand. "Are you scared?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. "This doesn't feel real. It feels like we're going to wake up back in that apartment, and this will all have been a dream." "If it is a dream," Margaret said, "I don't want to wake up." They fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and the ancient house breathing around them. Morning came with sunlight streaming through windows they hadn't bothered to cover. Thomas woke first, disoriented for a moment before remembering where they were. He got up carefully, his joints protesting, and walked to the window. The view took his breath away. The cabin sat on a ridge overlooking a valley, mountains rising on all sides, their peaks brilliant white against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. He'd never seen anything so beautiful. Margaret joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Oh my," she breathed. They spent the morning exploring in daylight, seeing things they'd missed in the darkness. The cabin was even more impressive than they'd realized. Every detail spoke of quality craftsmanship, dovetailed joints, hand-carved trim, floors made from single planks of pine 2 feet wide. In the basement, they found a workshop filled with tools, all organized and maintained. Harrison had clearly been a man who valued order. There were also boxes of papers, financial documents, receipts, letters going back decades. But it was in the library, a small room off the main living area, where things got interesting. Margaret was going through the books when she noticed something odd. One section of the bookshelf, about 3 feet wide, had books that looked different from the others. Newer, cleaner, like they'd been handled recently or protected somehow. She pulled one out. It was hollow, just a shell. So was the next one, and the next. Her heart started racing. "Thomas," she called, "come look at this." He came in, and she showed him the fake books. Together, they removed them all, revealing a small metal panel behind them, set flush into the wood. It had a keyhole, the old-fashioned kind. Thomas pulled out the keyring. They'd only used one of the 3 keys to open the front door. He tried the second key. It didn't fit. The third one slid in smoothly. "Wait," Margaret said, her hand on his arm. What if we shouldn't open this?" "It's our house now," Thomas said gently. "Whatever's in here, Harrison wanted us to have it." He turned the key. A latch clicked. The panel swung open to reveal a small safe, maybe 2 feet square, with a combination lock. They stared at it for a long moment. "Now what?" Margaret whispered. Thomas noticed a piece of paper taped to the inside of the panel door, yellowed with age. On it, in Harrison's handwriting, "For the family who remembers." "Remembers what?" Margaret asked. Thomas thought hard, going back through everything they'd read in the journals, every photograph they'd seen. Then it hit him. His birthday. There was a photograph downstairs, labeled Harrison William Reed, born August 4th, 1923. August 4th, 1923, Margaret repeated. 8/4/1923. Thomas spun the dial slowly. 8, then 4, then 19, then 23. He pulled the handle. Nothing happened. He tried different combinations, different orders, but none worked. Frustrated, he sat back. Margaret picked up one of Harrison's journals and started flipping through it, looking for any other significant dates. She found entries about moving to Colorado, about building the cabin, about his work in Chicago before the move. Then she found it. An entry from November 11th, 1947. Today I leave everything behind, the date I should have chosen years ago, the date the truth became clear. 11/11/47. My new birthday, the day I was reborn. Try 11/11/47, she said. Thomas dialed it in. 11/11/47. He pulled the handle. The safe opened. Inside were more journals, these ones different, leather-bound and thick. There were also photographs, documents sealed in plastic, and a large manila envelope with "Read this first" written on it in Harrison's shaky handwriting. Thomas pulled out the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, several pages long, dated just 3 months before Harrison's death. Margaret leaned against him as he read aloud. To whoever finds this, if you've made it this far, you're family, and you've earned the truth. My name is Harrison William Reed, and for most of my life, I was a banker in Chicago. I watched the crash of 29 destroy lives, families, futures. I watched men jump from buildings because numbers on paper told them they had nothing left. I swore I would never let paper control my life again. I started collecting, not for greed, but for preservation. Real things, valuable things, things that would outlast any economy, any government, any bank. Gold, when it was still legal to own privately. Rare coins before they became rare. Artifacts, jewelry, bonds from foreign governments that most people thought were worthless. I was good at it. Very good. I knew what to buy, when to buy it, how to hide it from those who would tax it, regulate it, or take it away. I wasn't a criminal, at least not by the standards that matter. I was a survivor. When I came to Colorado in '47, I brought everything with me. I built this cabin with my own hands, with the help of a few men I trusted, men who are long dead now, and beneath it, I built something else, a vault, a preservation chamber, a legacy. I never married, never had children, never trusted anyone enough to share this secret, but blood is blood, and family, even distant family, deserves what I've built. Beneath this cabin, in a chamber sealed and climate-controlled, running on a geothermal system that will outlast us all, is my life's work. The collection is complete. I stopped adding to it 20 years ago. I've only maintained it, protected it, waited for the right time, the right people. The value, when I last calculated it in 2015, was approximately $260 million. It's likely worth more now. This is not a treasure hunt. This is not a game. This is responsibility. What you do with it will define you, test you, possibly destroy you if you're not careful. But it's yours now. I leave it in your hands, and I hope you're stronger than I was. The entrance is in the main room, beneath the rug in front of the fireplace. There's a trapdoor, locked. You'll need both of the remaining keys turned simultaneously. Below, you'll find everything. Do not be afraid. Do not be greedy. Do not forget that everything of value comes with a price. Your uncle, Harrison William Reed. Margaret and Thomas stood frozen, the letter trembling between them. $260 million. The number was so large it didn't even feel real. Beneath this cabin, beneath their feet, was a fortune. They looked at each other, years of struggle written in every line on their faces, every grey hair, every worn callus on their hands. They'd worked their whole lives, saved nothing, owned nothing. And now this. The main room, Thomas said quietly. The rug in front of the fireplace. They walked there slowly, as if in a trance. The rug was large, a faded oriental pattern, hand-woven, probably worth thousands itself. Together they rolled it back, revealing wide pine floorboards underneath. At first, they saw nothing different. Then Margaret's finger traced a seam, almost invisible, outlining a square section about 4 feet across. Thomas got down on his knees, running his hands along the edges. He found them, 2 keyholes, one on each side, hidden in the natural knots of the wood. He pulled out the key ring. 2 keys left. "Together," he said. Margaret knelt beside him. He handed her one key. They positioned them in the locks, looked at each other one more time, and turned them simultaneously. Something deep beneath them clicked, then whirred. The sound of machinery, old but well-maintained, coming to life after years of silence. The section of floor rose slightly, pneumatic pressure hissing, creating a gap just wide enough for fingers. Thomas lifted the trapdoor. It was heavy, reinforced with metal, but it rose smoothly on balanced hinges. Beneath it, a ladder descended into darkness. But this wasn't a root cellar or a simple storage space. This was engineered, intentional. Metal rungs bolted into concrete, led down into a space that exhaled cool, dry air. Margaret found a switch just inside the opening. She flipped it. Lights flickered on below, revealing a staircase descending at least 20 feet into the earth. They stood at the edge, looking down into Harrison's secret, into their inheritance, into whatever waited in the darkness below. "Are we really going to do this?" Margaret whispered. Thomas took her hand, squeezed it, and put his foot on the first rung. "We came this far," he said. "Let's see what our uncle left us." And together, step by step, they descended into the vault, into the secret that would change their lives forever, into a legacy of $260 million and all the complications that came with it. The descent felt endless, though it was probably only 20 feet. Each metal rung was cold under their hands, and the air grew cooler with every step down. Margaret's breath came in short gasps, not from exertion but from anticipation, from fear, from the sheer unreality of what they were doing. When their feet finally touched solid ground, they found themselves in a small chamber, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with smooth concrete walls and a ceiling reinforced with steel beams. The lighting was soft, recessed fixtures that created no shadows, just even illumination throughout the space. "How is there electricity down here?" Margaret whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Thomas pointed to a metal box on the wall, humming quietly. "Generator, maybe, or that geothermal system Harrison mentioned in the letter." The chamber felt like a decompression space, an airlock between the world above and whatever lay beyond. One wall was lined with filing cabinets, old metal ones painted grey. Another wall held shelves filled with leather-bound journals, dozens of them, organized by year. From 1947 to 2018, Harrison's entire life in Colorado documented and preserved. Margaret walked to the shelves and pulled out a journal at random. 1963. She opened it, and Harrison's careful handwriting filled the pages. January 3, 1963. Acquired 18 gold Double Eagle coins from estate sale in Denver, mint condition. Paid $800. Current value approximately $3,000. Future value incalculable. Thomas was going through the filing cabinets. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with meticulous detail. Austrian bonds, 1927. Roman coins, authenticated. Tiffany jewelry, 1880s. Stock certificates, pre-depression. Every file contained documentation, photographs, certificates of authenticity, purchase receipts, historical research. Harrison hadn't just collected valuable items. He'd created an archive, a museum-quality record of everything he'd acquired. "Thomas," Margaret said, her voice shaky, "look at this entry, June 15, 1972. The collection has now exceeded $5 million in estimated value. I should stop, but I can't. Each piece tells a story, preserves a moment in history. This isn't about money anymore. It's about keeping these things safe from a world that doesn't appreciate permanence." She flipped forward, reading entries spanning decades. Harrison had been obsessive, dedicated, perhaps even a little mad. But his writing showed a brilliant mind, someone who understood economics, history, and human nature. In a journal from 1998, he'd written, "I'm 65 now. My health is failing. I need to ensure the collection survives me. I've reinforced the vault, installed redundant systems, created maps and inventories. Whoever finds this will think I was crazy. Maybe I was. But crazy men sometimes preserve what sane men destroy. Thomas found a large rolled paper in one of the drawers. He spread it out on a small table in the corner. It was a detailed blueprint of the underground structure, hand-drawn but precise. The chamber they were in was just the entrance. Beyond it, through a sealed door on the far wall, was something much larger. Margaret joined him, studying the blueprint. The main vault was enormous, at least 40 feet by 60 feet, with a ceiling height of 12 feet. Within it were marked sections: precious metals, numismatics, artifacts, documents, gems and jewelry. "This is impossible," Margaret breathed. "How did he build all this without anyone knowing?" Thomas pointed to notes on the blueprint. "Says here he brought in workers from Denver, paid them in cash, made them sign confidentiality agreements. This was 1952, 1953. Different time. Easier to keep secrets." They turned their attention to the sealed door. It was massive, steel-reinforced, set into a concrete frame. It looked like something from a bank vault, which made sense given Harrison's background. Beside it was a control panel, surprisingly modern-looking, with a digital keypad. "This has been updated," Thomas observed. "Recently, too." There was a small envelope taped to the panel, labeled Access Code. Inside, another note from Harrison. "I'm not a fool. I know you'll need help. The code is the year I was truly born, the year I understood what mattered. Not the year I came into this world, but the year I left the old one behind." 1947, Margaret said immediately, when he left Chicago. Thomas punched in the numbers. 1947. Nothing happened. He tried it again. Still nothing. "Maybe it's just 47, Margaret suggested. Thomas entered. 47. The keypad beeped and a red light turned green, but the door didn't open. Instead, a mechanical voice, tinny and aged, came from a speaker they hadn't noticed. "Voice authentication required. State your full legal name and relationship to Harrison William Reed." They looked at each other, stunned. Thomas leaned toward the speaker. "Thomas James Reed. He was my uncle, my father's brother." Silence. Then, "Authentication accepted. Fingerprint scan required." A small panel slid open next to the keypad, revealing a glass surface that glowed blue. "This is insane," Margaret whispered. "When did he install all this?" Thomas placed his thumb on the scanner. It beeped, and somewhere deep in the mechanism, locks began to disengage. 1, 2, 3, 4 heavy bolts sliding back with solid metallic thuds that they felt through the floor. The door cracked open, pneumatic seals hissing as decades-old air pressure equalized. Cool air flowed out, carrying a faint metallic scent. Thomas grabbed the handle and pulled. The door swung open smoothly despite its obvious weight, perfectly balanced on precision hinges. Beyond it was darkness, vast and complete. Then lights began to flicker on in sequence, row by row, revealing the impossible. The vault was exactly as the blueprint had shown, a massive underground chamber carved from solid rock and reinforced with concrete. But what filled it took their breath away. Directly ahead, taking up the entire center of the space, were rows of wooden crates stacked neatly on pallets. Each crate was labeled with numbers and codes. Thomas approached the nearest one and found a crowbar hanging on the wall, clearly left there for this purpose. His hands shook as he pried open the lid. Inside, nestled in custom foam padding, were gold bars. Not coins, not jewelry, but pure gold bullion, each bar stamped with weight and purity marks. 1 bar, 2, 3, 4. The crate held 20 bars, each weighing what looked like 1 kilogram. Margaret's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the concrete floor. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Thomas moved to the next crate. More gold, the next the same. He started counting crates. There were at least 50 of them in this section alone. "Margaret," he said, his voice barely working, "if each crate has 20 bars, and each bar is a kilo, that's—" He couldn't do the math. His mind wouldn't work. She pulled herself together, stood up, and moved to a different section of the vault. Here, metal shelving units held smaller boxes, each clearly labeled. She opened one marked Morgan Dollars, Uncirculated, 1878 through 1921. Inside were rolls and rolls of silver coins, each one pristine, untouched, perfect. She knew enough from Thomas's occasional coin collecting to understand that uncirculated Morgan dollars, especially rare dates, could be worth hundreds or thousands of dollars each. This box held what looked like 500 coins. The next shelf held gold coins. Double eagles, Indian heads, all pre-1933, all illegal to own when Harrison had acquired them, but now perfectly legal and incredibly valuable. Thomas had moved to another section, where glass cases lined the walls like a museum. Inside were artifacts that made his head spin. Ancient Roman coins laid out in careful rows. Medieval jewelry displayed on velvet. Pocket watches from the 1800s, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Civil War memorabilia, including what looked like a genuine Confederate uniform and sword. "This isn't a collection," he said. "This is a time capsule. This is history." Margaret found the documents section. Here, in climate-controlled cabinets, were stock certificates from companies that no longer existed, bonds from governments that had fallen, but also, she discovered, bonds from governments that had survived. Swiss bonds, British bonds, American savings bonds from the 1940s, never cashed. One folder was labeled Berkshire Hathaway, Original Shares, 1965. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were 10 stock certificates, each for 100 shares, purchased for what the receipt showed as $19 per share. She knew enough from news articles to know that Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, was now worth hundreds of thousands of dollars per share. She did the quick math in her head and nearly fainted. 1,000 shares at what? $400,000 per share. That was $400 million in this folder alone. But the receipt showed Harrison had paid $19,000 total in 1965. He'd held these for over 50 years, never selling, never cashing in, just waiting. "Thomas," she called out, her voice cracking. "The letter said 260 million. I think he was lowballing it. I think it's worth more, much more." Thomas walked to the back of the vault, where a simple desk sat against the wall, much like the one in the chamber above. On it was a leather portfolio, thick and heavy. He opened it to find what appeared to be Harrison's final accounting, dated December 2018, just months before his death. The document was typed, not handwritten, and it was thorough. Every item in the vault was listed, categorized, valued based on market prices from that year. Thomas flipped through page after page, his eyes catching figures that seemed impossible. Gold bullion, $54.3 million. Rare coins, $78.7 million. Precious gems, $41.2 million. Historical artifacts, $38.5 million. Stock certificates and bonds, $97.1 million. The total at the bottom, circled in red ink, $309.8 million. Thomas sat down at the desk, the portfolio still open in front of him. 309 million, not 260. Harrison had either miscalculated in his letter or the value had increased even more than he'd anticipated in his final years. Margaret joined him, reading over his shoulder. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the quiet hum of the climate control system keeping the vault at a perfect temperature and humidity. "What do we do?" Margaret finally whispered. "Thomas, what do we do with all of this?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I can't even process this. Is it legal? Can we even keep it? Won't the government want taxes or claim some of it?" "I don't know," he repeated. "We need a lawyer, a good one, maybe several." Margaret stood up and walked the length of the vault again, trying to take it all in. In one corner, she found something they'd initially missed, a small safe, different from everything else, modern and digital, Next to it was another envelope. "Final message," she read from the envelope. Inside was a single page. "If you've made it this far, you understand the magnitude of what I've left you. This is not just wealth, this is responsibility. In this safe is cash, $2 million in hundreds, for immediate needs. Use it to secure legal help, to protect yourselves, to begin the process of deciding what to do with the rest. But know this, the moment you reveal what's here, your lives will change forever. People will come for you, for this, for what they think they deserve. Family you've never met will emerge. The government will have questions. Strangers will have plans. You have 3 choices. 1. Keep it all secret, take what you need quietly, and leave the rest for another generation. 2. Liquidate everything, take the money and run. 3. Honor what I tried to do, preserve it, protect it, maybe share it in ways that matter. I don't know which choice is right. I only know that I chose solitude, secrecy, and preservation. I chose to hide from the world rather than engage with it. Maybe that was cowardice. Maybe it was wisdom. You'll have to decide for yourselves. The safe code is your birthday, Thomas. Day and month only. I've been watching over you all these years, even if you never knew it. I knew when you were born, when you married, when your children came. I knew you struggled, and I'm sorry I never helped while I was alive. I was too afraid, too broken, too convinced that money corrupted everything it touched. But you've earned this. You found it. You opened every lock, solved every puzzle. That means something. It means you're persistent, clever, and brave enough to face what comes next. Good luck. You're going to need it. Your Uncle Harrison. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she finished reading. He was watching us. All those years we were struggling, and he knew. Thomas stood and approached the safe. My birthday, August 19th, 8:19. He punched in the code. The safe beeped and clicked open. Inside were neat stacks of $100 bills, banded and labeled. 200 bundles, each containing $10,000. $2 million in cash, right there. More money than they'd earned in their entire lives combined. Beneath the cash was one more item, a photograph. It showed Harrison, much older, maybe in his 80s, standing in this very vault. He was smiling, something they hadn't seen in any other picture, and he was holding a photograph of his own, one they recognized. It was their wedding photo, Thomas and Margaret, young and hopeful, standing outside the courthouse where they'd been married 49 years ago. "How did he have this?" Margaret asked, her voice breaking. Thomas picked up the photo with shaking hands. On the back in Harrison's writing, "Family is what endures. May you build something better than I did." They stood there in the vault, surrounded by more wealth than they could comprehend, holding a photograph that proved Harrison had cared, had watched, had waited for the right moment to pass this burden and blessing onto them. Margaret leaned against Thomas, and he wrapped his arms around her. They were both crying now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all, by the weight of responsibility, by the sheer impossibility of their situation. What happens next will turn their quiet life upside down, reveal truths nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the greatest gifts come with the heaviest burdens. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. They climbed back up to the cabin as dawn was breaking, neither of them having slept. They'd spent the entire night in the vault, going through inventories, reading Harrison's notes, trying to understand the full scope of what they'd inherited. Now, sitting on the front porch with instant coffee and the rising sun painting the mountains gold, they had to face reality. "We can't tell anyone," Margaret said. "Not yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with." Thomas nodded. "But we need help. That lawyer in Boulder, Caldwell. He handled Harrison's estate. He must know something." "How much do you think he knows?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out." They drove into Silver Creek later that morning, got gas at the same station, and asked to use the phone. The old man who owned the place, whose name they learned was Earl, directed them to the payphone outside the general store. Margaret called Benjamin Caldwell's office. When he answered, she tried to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Margaret Reed. My husband and I have been at the property for a couple of days now." "Mrs. Reed, wonderful. I trust everything is in order." We found some things in the cabin. We'd like to speak with you in person if possible." There was a pause. "What kind of things, Mrs. Reed?" "The kind that require discretion." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Can you be in Boulder tomorrow, say 10 in the morning?" "We'll be there." They hung up and spent the rest of the day trying to act normal, which was impossible. They bought groceries at the general store where the clerk, a woman named Dottie, asked too many questions about the old Reed place. "Heard you folks are fixing it up," she said, scanning their items. "That cabin's been a mystery around here for decades. Harrison kept to himself something fierce. Some folks thought he was cooking meth up there." She laughed. "Others said he was CIA, hiding out. One guy swore he was a Nazi war criminal." Margaret forced a smile. "He was just a private man, from what we understand." "Well, it's good to see the place occupied again. Brings life back to the area. You planning to stay?" "We're not sure yet," Thomas said, paying in cash, still figuring things out. As they drove back up the mountain, they noticed a truck following them at a distance. It stayed far enough back that they couldn't see the driver, but close enough that it was clearly tailing them. "We're being watched," Thomas said quietly. "Maybe it's just someone else heading up the mountain." But when they reached their turnoff, the truck slowed, stopped, and then turned around and headed back down. "That's not normal," Margaret said, her stomach knotting. Back at the cabin, they locked all the doors and windows, something Harrison had made easy with heavy-duty deadbolts and reinforced frames. They pulled out one of the bundles of cash from the vault, $10,000, and hid the rest in a closet upstairs. That night, they heard sounds outside, footsteps on gravel, the creak of someone testing the porch steps, the soft rattle of a door handle being tried. Thomas grabbed a fire poker from beside the hearth and moved to the window. In the moonlight, he saw a figure in dark clothing, moving around the perimeter of the cabin, checking windows, looking for a way in. "Who's there?" Thomas shouted through the door. "This is private property." The figure froze, then ran. Thomas heard an engine start somewhere down the road, then fade into the distance. They didn't sleep that night either. The drive to Boulder the next morning took 3 hours. They barely spoke, both lost in their own thoughts, both terrified and electrified by what was happening to their lives. Benjamin Caldwell's office was in a historic building downtown, all exposed brick and tall windows. He met them personally at the door, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed, please, come in." His office was lined with legal books and photographs of Colorado landscapes. He offered them coffee, which they accepted gratefully, and then sat behind his desk with his hands folded. "Now then," he said, "you mentioned you found something at the property?" Thomas and Margaret exchanged glances. They'd rehearsed this on the drive, but now that the moment was here, the words felt impossible. "Mr. Caldwell," Thomas began, "how much did you know about my uncle, about what he was doing up there?" Caldwell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I knew Harrison for 26 years. I handled his legal affairs, his will, various trusts. He was a very private client, but over time he trusted me with certain information." "Did he tell you about the vault?" Now Caldwell's eyebrows rose. "You found it." "You knew," Margaret said. "You knew what was down there." Caldwell stood and walked to his window, looking out over the street. "I knew Harrison had assets, significant assets. He never told me the exact nature or extent, but he made it clear that whoever inherited the property would also inherit a considerable responsibility. $300 million, Thomas said flatly, give or take. Caldwell turned sharply. I'm sorry, did you say 300 million? You didn't know the amount? I knew it was substantial, but he sat back down heavily. 300 million. Good Lord. We need help, Margaret said. We don't know what to do. Is it legal? Do we owe taxes? Will the government try to take it? Caldwell ran a hand through his hair. This is beyond my expertise. But I can tell you this. If Harrison acquired everything legally, which I have to assume he did given his meticulous nature, then yes, it's yours. You'll owe estate taxes, certainly, but Colorado doesn't have an inheritance tax, and the federal estate tax has a significant exemption. How much is the exemption? Thomas asked. Currently about 11.7 million per individual. Harrison never married, so his exemption applies. Anything over that will be taxed at 40%. Margaret did the math in her head. So we'd owe taxes on about 288 million. 40% of that is 115 million, roughly, Caldwell finished, which would leave you with approximately 194 million, assuming my quick math is correct and assuming all assets are properly documented and valued. They sat in stunned silence. But, Caldwell continued, there are ways to structure this, to minimize the tax burden legally. Charitable trusts, foundation grants, stepped-up basis for certain assets. You need a team, tax attorneys, estate planners, financial advisors, and you need people you can trust absolutely. Can you help us? Margaret asked. Caldwell leaned back in his chair. I can make introductions, but Mrs. Reed, Mr. Reed, I need you to understand something. The moment you begin this process, the moment you start moving assets, filing paperwork, talking to banks, your lives will change irrevocably. Word will get out. It always does. And when it does, you'll become targets. Someone already tried to break into the cabin last night, Thomas said. Caldwell's face darkened. Already? How is that possible? Who knows? Just us and you, Margaret said. We haven't told anyone, not even our children. Small towns have eyes, Caldwell said, and Harrison's eccentricities were well known. People have been speculating for years about what he had up there. Now that you've shown up, claimed the property, they're watching, some out of curiosity, some out of greed. What do we do? Thomas asked. First, you secure the property properly. I know a security company, discreet and reliable. Second, you decide what you want to do. Do you want to keep it all, liquidate it, create a foundation? There's no wrong answer, but there are consequences to each choice. Margaret spoke up. Harrison's letter said we had 3 choices. Keep it secret, sell everything, or preserve it and share it. Caldwell nodded. Those are good options, but let me add a 4th. You could do all 3 in different measures. Keep what matters to you personally, liquidate what doesn't, and use the proceeds to do good in the world. That sounds complicated, Thomas said. Everything about this is complicated, Caldwell replied. But you don't have to decide today. What you need today is protection. Legal protection, physical protection, and financial protection. I can help with all 3, but it will require trust. They talked for another 2 hours, going through options, discussing next steps, signing limited power of attorney documents that would allow Caldwell to begin assembling a team on their behalf. When they finally left his office, the sun was setting over the Rockies, and they both felt like they'd aged a decade in a single day. On the drive back to Silver Creek, Margaret finally broke the silence. Our children. We have to tell them something. Not yet, Thomas said. Not until we have a plan. You know David will want to tell us what to do with it. Lisa will want to borrow against it. And Sarah, he trailed off. Sarah will be happy for us, Margaret finished. But you're right, not yet. They stopped for gas in a small town, and Thomas went inside to pay. While he was gone, Margaret sat in the car, watching the mountains turn purple in the dying light. A man approached her window, tapping on the glass. She jumped, her heart racing. He was middle-aged, wearing jeans and a work shirt, with a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry to startle you, ma'am. I'm Dave Jenkins. I do property management around here. Heard you folks inherited the old Reed place." Margaret rolled the window down slightly. "How did you hear that?" "Small area, word travels. I just wanted to offer my services. If you need someone to look after the place, keep an eye on things when you're not around." "We're fine. Thank you." Thing is, that's a big property for two people to manage. Lots of maintenance, and it's pretty isolated. Folks have tried to break into empty cabins before. Having someone local check in regular like could save you a lot of headaches. There was something in his tone that made Margaret's skin crawl. "We'll consider it. Thank you." "Here's my card," he said, pulling one from his pocket and handing it through the window gap. "Call any time. I'm real good at keeping things secure. Real good at keeping secrets, too." He walked away before she could respond. Thomas came back to the car a moment later. "Who was that?" "Trouble," Margaret said, handing him the card. "I think word is definitely out." They drove the rest of the way in tense silence. When they finally pulled up to the cabin, they found fresh tire tracks in the dirt, circling the clearing, but no sign of whoever had made them. Inside, everything looked undisturbed, but Thomas checked the vault entrance anyway. Still sealed, still secure. They sat at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee and the bundle of cash between them. "We can't stay here unprotected," Thomas said. "Caldwell was right. We need security. How long do you think we have before this becomes public?" "Days, maybe. A week if we're lucky." Margaret picked up one of the $100 bills, turning it over in her hands. It was real, solid, tangible. So different from the numbers in Harrison's ledger, from the abstract concept of $300 million. "You know what's strange?" she said. "I thought finding money would make me feel safe, but I've never felt more afraid in my life." Thomas reached across and took her hand. "We're going to get through this, together, like we've gotten through everything else. But this is different. This is bigger than anything we've ever faced." "Then we'll learn," he said. "We'll adapt. That's what we've always done." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the old cabin. Somewhere in the distance, an engine growled to life, then faded. They were being watched. They were being circled, and they had no idea who to trust or what to do next. But beneath their feet, sealed in concrete and steel, was the answer to every financial problem they'd ever had, and the beginning of problems they'd never imagined. Harrison had been right about one thing. This wasn't just a treasure. It was a test. And Margaret and Thomas Reed were about to discover whether they had what it took to pass it. The security team arrived 3 days later, 4 men in unmarked vehicles who swept the property with equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. They were ex-military, Caldwell had assured them, professionals who knew how to be discreet. The team leader, a quiet man named Marcus who looked to be in his early 40s, walked the perimeter with Thomas while his crew set up cameras and motion sensors. "You've got a problem," Marcus said bluntly. "This property is indefensible from a tactical standpoint. Too many access points, too much forest cover, too isolated for rapid response if something goes wrong." "What do you recommend?" Thomas asked. "Ideally, you don't stay here. You secure the asset, move to a location we can actually protect, and wait until the legal stuff is sorted out." "This is our home now," Thomas said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "We're not leaving." Marcus nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Then we make it work. Cameras on all approaches, pressure sensors on the access road, reinforced locks, panic buttons in every room, and you get a sat phone because cell service up here is garbage." By nightfall, the cabin looked the same, but felt different. Thomas could see the small cameras tucked into the eaves, barely visible. Motion lights had been installed in the trees. Inside, small panic buttons had been mounted under tables and beside the bed. "Feels like a prison," Margaret said, looking at all the new security measures. "Feels like a fortress," Thomas countered. There's a difference. That night, they got their first real test. At 2:37 in the morning, the motion sensors triggered. Lights flooded the clearing, and the sat phone beside their bed buzzed with an alert. Marcus's voice came through immediately. "We've got movement on the south approach. 3 individuals on foot. Stay inside. Lock the bedroom door." Thomas and Margaret huddled together, listening to footsteps on the porch, the rattle of door handles, low voices conferring. Then a loud crack as someone tried to force the back door. "Police are en route," Marcus said through the phone. "Eta 12 minutes." 12 minutes felt like 12 hours. They heard more sounds, someone attempting to pry open a window, frustrated cursing when the reinforced frames held. Then, finally, sirens in the distance. The footsteps scattered, running back into the forest. By the time Sheriff Dale Cooper arrived with 2 deputies, the intruders were gone, leaving behind a crowbar and fresh boot prints in the dirt. Sheriff Cooper was a tall man in his mid-50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He'd been the one who'd taken the initial report about the attempted break-in 3 days earlier. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed," he said, examining the crowbar with a flashlight, "we need to talk about what's really going on here." They invited him inside, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table while he took notes. "The story going around town," Cooper said, "is that Harrison Reed had something valuable up here. Gold, some folks say. Others think it was cash from bank robberies back in the day. One guy told me Harrison was guarding alien artifacts." He looked up from his notepad. "I'm guessing the truth is somewhere in between?" Thomas and Margaret exchanged glances. Caldwell had warned them this moment would come. "Sheriff," Margaret said carefully, "our uncle left us an inheritance, a significant one. We're working with lawyers to handle it properly, pay all the necessary taxes, do everything by the book." "How significant?" "Significant enough that people are trying to break in." Cooper set down his pen. "Ma'am, I can't protect you if I don't know what I'm protecting. How much are we talking about?" Thomas took a breath. "Hundreds of millions of dollars." The sheriff's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Completely." Cooper sat back, processing. "And it's here? On this property?" "In a secure location, yes. Then you need more than me and 2 deputies. You need federal protection, FBI, maybe Treasury Department." "We're working on it," Thomas said. "But right now, we need someone local we can trust. Someone who knows this area and can keep word from spreading any further than it already has." Cooper was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark forest. "My daddy worked in these mountains his whole life. Logger, then a ranger. He taught me that sometimes the biggest trees fall the hardest, and when they do, they take everything around them down too." He turned back to face them. "You folks seem like decent people. You didn't ask for this, but you're sitting on something that's going to bring out the worst in everyone who knows about it." "We know," Margaret said quietly. "I'll do what I can," Cooper said. "Increase patrols, keep an eye on who's coming and going into Silver Creek. But you need to understand, I've got 347 people in my jurisdiction, and if word gets out about what you've got up here, I'll have 3,000 people to deal with. Maybe more." He was right. By the end of the week, Silver Creek was transformed. News vans appeared first, 2 of them from Denver stations. Reporters knocked on doors, asking questions, filming B-roll of the mountains and the town. The general store was suddenly doing 3 times its normal business as journalists and curiosity seekers stopped for supplies and gossip. Thomas and Margaret watched it unfold from the cabin, monitors showing them the activity on the access road. Cars would drive up, slow down when they saw the security cameras, then turn around. Some were bold enough to park and approach on foot, only to be intercepted by Marcus's team. Then the government arrived. Two IRS agents in cheap suits showed up with a court order requiring them to provide documentation of all assets inherited from Harrison Reed. Caldwell handled it, providing basic inventory lists without specific valuations, buying them time. The Treasury Department sent someone from their Art Theft and Antiquities Division interested in some of the historical artifacts Harrison had collected. They wanted to verify that nothing had been stolen or illegally exported. A representative from the Smithsonian called, having heard rumors about the collection, asking if they might be interested in donating certain pieces for public display. And through it all, the phone calls from family started. David called first. "Mum, what the hell is going on? There's a news story online about you and Dad inheriting a fortune. They're saying hundreds of millions." "It's complicated, sweetheart," Margaret said. "Complicated? Mum, Lisa just called me crying, saying you've been keeping secrets, and some guy claiming to be a second cousin contacted Sarah, saying he deserves a share." "We don't even know who these people are, David." "Then hire lawyers, protect yourselves, and for God's sake, protect your family. If this is real, people are going to come after you." "We know, we're handling it." "Are you? Because from here it looks like chaos." The conversation ended badly, with David insisting they needed to liquidate everything immediately, put it in trust funds for the grandchildren, and disappear before something terrible happened. Lisa called next, her approach different but equally stressful. "Mom, I don't want to ask for anything, but Rick's business is failing, and we're about to lose the house. If there's any way you could help, just a loan against the inheritance." "Honey, it's not that simple. We don't have access to liquid funds yet. Everything's tied up in legal proceedings." "But the news said hundreds of millions." "It's in assets, not cash. And we have to pay taxes, legal fees, authenticate everything." "So there's nothing you can do?" The hurt in Lisa's voice cut deep, but Margaret held firm. "Not right now. But when this is settled, we'll help however we can. I promise." Sarah's call was the hardest. She didn't ask for money, didn't demand anything. She just cried. "Mum, I'm scared for you. I saw the news. They're making you sound like lottery winners, but I know you. You're probably terrified and exhausted, and you don't know who to trust." "We're okay, baby," Margaret lied. "Your father and I are handling it. Come stay with me. Please, bring whatever you need to bring, but get out of there before something bad happens." "We can't leave, not yet." By the second week, the treasure hunters arrived. They came in groups, mostly men, some alone, some in pairs. They had metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, drones with cameras. They camped in the national forest nearby, treating the whole thing like a game, like Harrison's fortune was buried treasure waiting to be found. Sheriff Cooper did his best to run them off, citing trespassing laws and safety concerns. But they kept coming back, bolder each time. One group tried to dig on the property line, convinced that Harrison had buried gold in the forest. Marcus's team caught them and called the sheriff, who arrested 3 men and confiscated their equipment. Another group tried to bribe one of Marcus's security personnel, offering him $50,000 for information about what was really in the cabin. The guard reported it immediately, and Marcus tightened security further. Then came the legal threats. A woman claiming to be Harrison's daughter from a secret relationship filed a lawsuit in Boulder County Court, demanding DNA testing and a share of the estate. Caldwell investigated and found she'd filed similar claims against 3 other estates in the past decade, all dismissed as fraudulent. A man who said he'd worked for Harrison in the 1970s claimed he'd been promised compensation that was never paid, demanding $2 million in back wages. He had no documentation, no proof, nothing but a story. Distant relatives started emerging from everywhere. 3rd cousins, 4th cousins, people Thomas had never heard of and couldn't verify. Each one wanted something, believed they deserved something, threatened to sue if they didn't get it. The stress was overwhelming. Thomas started having chest pains in the middle of the night. Margaret would wake to find him sitting up in bed, hand pressed to his heart, breathing shallow. "It's nothing," he'd say. "Just anxiety." But when it happened 3 nights in a row, she insisted they drive to the hospital in Boulder. The emergency room doctor ran tests, did an EKG, took blood work. Thomas sat on the examination table in a paper gown, looking older and frailer than Margaret had ever seen him. "Your heart is fine," the doctor finally said, "but your blood pressure is through the roof and your stress levels are dangerous. Whatever's going on in your life, you need to find a way to manage it, or you're going to have a real heart attack." They drove back to Silver Creek in silence. Halfway there, Thomas pulled over at a scenic overlook and turned off the engine. "I can't do this," he said quietly. Margaret turned to him. "Can't do what?" "This, all of it. The security, the lawyers, the family drama, the strangers. I thought inheriting this would solve our problems, but it's destroying us." "Thomas?" "I'm serious, Margaret. I wake up every morning wondering if today's the day someone gets past security. If today's the day the government decides to seize everything. If today's the day I drop dead from the stress." His voice broke. "We were poor, but we were happy. We had each other, we had enough. And now we have everything, and I've never felt more like we're losing." Margaret took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. We didn't ask for this, but we have it. And Harrison, crazy as he was, he gave it to us for a reason. Not to destroy us, but to test us, to see if we're strong enough to handle it." "What if we're not?" "Then we fail," she said simply. "We fail, and we learn, and we adapt, like we've done our whole lives. But we don't give up, not now. Not when we're this close to figuring it out." "Close to what?" She smiled, surprising herself. "Close to doing something that matters. Harrison hoarded all that wealth, kept it hidden, died alone and afraid. We can be different. We can use it, share it, make it mean something beyond just numbers in a vault." Thomas stared at her, and slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased. "When did you get so wise?" "About 5 minutes ago," she admitted. "I'm terrified too, Thomas. But I'm also angry. Angry at the people trying to take advantage of us. Angry at our kids for being more worried about money than our safety. Angry at myself for ever thinking money would make us happy." "So what do? We stop reacting and start acting. We stop letting other people control this narrative. We make a decision about what we want to do with the inheritance, and we do it, on our terms." They sat at the overlook for another hour, watching the sun move across the mountains, talking through options, making plans. By the time they drove back to the cabin, they had a strategy. The next morning, Margaret called Caldwell. "We've made a decision. We want to establish a foundation, something that preserves Harrison's collection but makes it accessible. A museum, maybe, or a historical society. And we want to endow it with enough money to run in perpetuity." "That's a significant undertaking," Caldwell said. "But it's doable. How much were you thinking of endowing?" "Half," Margaret said. "Half of everything. We keep the other half for ourselves and our family, but half goes to preservation and public access." Caldwell was quiet for a moment. "That's approximately $150 million. You're sure?" "We're sure. Harrison spent his whole life hiding these things from the world. It's time the world got to see them. I'll start drawing up the paperwork. But Mrs. Reed, this is going to make you very public. Foundations require transparency, boards of directors, public filings. You won't be able to hide anymore." "Good," Margaret said. "We're done hiding." The announcement came 2 days later, coordinated through Caldwell's office and released to select media outlets. The Reed Foundation would be established with a $150 million endowment dedicated to preserving and displaying Harrison Reed's collection of historical artifacts, rare coins, and Americana. A museum would be built in Silver Creek, bringing jobs, tourism, and educational opportunities to the area. The remaining assets would stay with Thomas and Margaret Reed, who wished for privacy during this transition. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The mayor of Silver Creek called ecstatic, talking about economic development and putting their town on the map. The governor's office sent a letter of commendation. Newspapers ran editorials praising their generosity, but not everyone was pleased. The woman claiming to be Harrison's daughter amended her lawsuit, now demanding half of the foundation's endowment. The treasure hunters felt cheated, as if the Reeds had stolen something that should have been available for anyone to find, and some family members felt betrayed. David called, furious. "You're giving away $150 million to strangers, but you can't help your own daughter keep her house?" "David, we're not giving it to strangers. We're honoring your great-uncle's legacy, and we will help Lisa. We will help all of you, but not by just handing over money. We'll do it thoughtfully, carefully." "This is insane. You've changed." "No," Margaret said quietly. "We finally found our backbone." He hung up on her, but Sarah called an hour later, her voice warm with pride. "Mum, I just read the announcement. What you're doing is incredible. It's exactly what Grandpa would have wanted." "Your grandfather never met Harrison," Margaret said, confused. "I know, but Grandpa always said the purpose of wealth isn't having it, it's what you build with it. You're building something beautiful." Margaret cried after that call, the first tears of relief she'd shed in weeks. The turning point came on a cold November night, 3 weeks after the announcement. Marcus's team detected a group of 6 men approaching the property from 3 different directions, coordinated and equipped with professional gear. This wasn't opportunistic treasure hunters. This was organized. Sheriff Cooper responded with every deputy he had. The confrontation happened in the forest, just beyond the property line. The men were armed, carrying bolt cutters, explosives, detailed maps of the cabin's layout. One of them had been a security consultant who'd tried to bid on the job Marcus had won. He'd used that access to gather intelligence, then sold it to a crew out of Denver specializing in high-value robberies. The arrest was dramatic, covered by news helicopters that just happened to be in the area, footage showing law enforcement tackling suspects in the woods. It made national news. Elderly couple's fortune targeted by armed robbery crew. Gold rush turns dangerous in Colorado mountains. Treasure vault defended by security team. Suddenly, Thomas and Margaret weren't just lucky inheritors. They were victims, sympathetic, relatable. Public opinion shifted hard in their favor. The lawsuits started dropping. The fake relatives faded away. The treasure hunters moved on to easier targets. And in the quiet that followed, Thomas and Margaret could finally breathe. They sat on the porch one evening, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the first snow of the season dust the pine trees. "We made it," Thomas said. "Through the storm," Margaret agreed, "but there's still a long road ahead. Foundation board meetings, museum planning, dealing with the IRS, talking to our kids, figuring out how to help them without enabling them, learning to live with wealth instead of poverty." Margaret smiled. "That might be the hardest part." Thomas took her hand. "We'll figure it out, together, always together." In the distance, a coyote called, its voice echoing off the mountains. The security lights created a warm glow around the cabin, no longer feeling like a prison, but like a home they were building, piece by piece. Inside the vault, Harrison's collection waited, soon to be catalogued, authenticated, and shared with a world that would marvel at what one man had preserved. The gold would be liquidated to fund the foundation. The artifacts would find homes in carefully designed displays. The story would be told, not of greed or hoarding, but of transformation. 2 people who'd spent their lives with nothing had been given everything, and instead of being destroyed by it, they'd been refined, tested by fire and found strong. The storm had passed, but they knew others would come. Wealth didn't solve problems, it just changed them. But Margaret and Thomas Reed had learned something valuable in these chaotic weeks. They were stronger than they'd known, braver than they'd believed, and more capable than anyone, including themselves, had imagined. And sometimes that discovery was worth more than all the gold in Harrison's vault. The first official meeting of the Reed Foundation Board took place in January, 4 months after the inheritance was discovered. They held it in a conference room at Caldwell's law firm in Boulder, with 10 people around a long mahogany table and snow falling softly outside the windows. Margaret and Thomas sat at the head, both nervous in clothes they'd bought specifically for the occasion. Margaret wore a simple navy dress, Thomas a suit that felt too tight around the collar. They were surrounded by people Caldwell had carefully vetted: a museum director from Denver, a tax attorney, a non-profit consultant, an art historian, a local educator, and Sheriff Cooper, who'd agreed to serve as community liaison. "Let's begin," Caldwell said, opening his leather portfolio. "The foundation has been formally established with an endowment of $147 million after taxes and legal fees. The remaining assets, approximately $142 million, will stay with Mr. and Mrs. Reed in various trusts and accounts we'll discuss later." The numbers still didn't feel real to Margaret. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors and counted pennies, now responsible for managing more money than she could comprehend. The museum director, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, spoke next. "I've reviewed the preliminary inventory of the collection. What Harrison Reed assembled is extraordinary. The numismatic collection alone is museum quality. The historical artifacts span 3 centuries of American history, and some of the artwork and jewelry pieces are simply breathtaking." "How long will it take to catalog everything?" Thomas asked. "Properly? 18 months minimum. Each piece needs to be authenticated, appraised, photographed, and documented. We'll need specialists in multiple fields." "And the cost?" Margaret asked. "The foundation can handle it," the tax attorney assured her. "The endowment is designed to generate approximately $6 to $7 million annually in investment returns. That covers operations, staffing, insurance, and preservation." Sheriff Cooper leaned forward. "What about the museum building itself? Are you planning to use the cabin?" Thomas nodded. "That was Harrison's home. Seems fitting it becomes a place where people can see what he preserved." "We'll need significant renovations," Dr. Chen said. "Climate control, security systems, display cases, accessibility features. The cabin is historic, so we'll need to work with preservation specialists to maintain its integrity while modernizing the interior." "Estimated cost?" Margaret asked. 12 to 15 million for a world-class facility." The room fell silent. Margaret felt her stomach drop. Even with their fortune, spending $15 million felt impossible. The non-profit consultant, a young man named Aaron, smiled gently. "Mrs. Reed, the foundation has the resources. This is exactly what the endowment is for, and a facility of this caliber will generate revenue through admissions, tours, educational programs, and events. Within 5 years, it should be partially self-sustaining." They talked for 3 more hours, planning timelines, discussing governance, establishing protocols. By the end, Margaret's head was spinning, but she also felt something unexpected: purpose. This wasn't just about managing money. It was about creating something that would outlast them, something that honored Harrison's obsessive preservation while correcting his mistake of keeping it all hidden. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Chen approached Margaret privately. "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why are you doing this? Most people who inherit this kind of wealth, they keep it private, invest it, enjoy it quietly. Why go through the hassle of a public foundation and museum?" Margaret thought for a moment. "Because Harrison spent 60 years hiding from the world, and it made him miserable. He died alone, with no one to share his treasures with, no one to appreciate what he'd built. We don't want to make that mistake. Money you hoard turns into a burden. Money you share becomes a blessing." Dr. Chen smiled. "You're going to do wonderful things with this." The renovation of the cabin began in March. Contractors arrived with careful plans to preserve the historic structure while transforming its interior. The vault entrance would remain, but it would become part of the museum experience, allowing visitors to see where Harrison had hidden his collection. The main floor was redesigned with professional display cases and lighting. The upstairs bedrooms became offices for staff and archives for documents. A new wing was added to the back, built in the same style as the original cabin, housing additional gallery space and a small theater for educational films. Thomas oversaw much of the construction, his years in factory work giving him an eye for quality and detail. He argued with contractors about lumber grades, insisted on authentic materials, and personally tested every lock and security feature. Margaret worked with Dr. Chen on the catalogue, spending long days in the vault identifying items, researching their history, writing descriptions. She discovered she had a talent for this work, for finding the human stories behind each artifact. One afternoon, she was examining a pocket watch from the 1860s when she found an inscription inside. "To my beloved husband, may time always bring you home. M.A. 1862. She researched the initials and traced the watch to a Union soldier who'd survived the Civil War and returned to his wife in Ohio. Harrison had purchased it from an estate sale in 1956, but he'd never followed up on its history. Margaret found descendants of the original owner through genealogy websites. She called them, told them about the watch, and offered to return it. The great-great-granddaughter of the soldier wept on the phone. "We thought everything from his war service was lost. I can't believe this is real." "Would you like the watch back?" Margaret asked. There was a long pause. No, I think it belongs in your museum, where everyone can see it and remember him. But could we visit? Could we see it?" "Absolutely, and we'll make sure his story is told properly." That became Margaret's mission, finding the stories, connecting with descendants, making the collection about people, not just objects. Each item in the museum would have a narrative, a context, a human face. Meanwhile, Thomas was handling family matters. He'd set up meetings with each of their children, one by one, to discuss how they'd help them. Not handouts, he'd decided, but partnerships. David came first, flying in from Phoenix with his wife Rachel. They met at a restaurant in Boulder, neutral territory. "Dad," David started, defensive before Thomas even spoke. "I'm sorry for how I reacted. I was shocked, and I said things I shouldn't have." "I understand," Thomas said. "This has been overwhelming for all of us." "Are you doing okay? I saw the news about the robbery attempt." "We're safe. We have good people protecting us." Rachel spoke up. "We're worried about you both. This is so much stress at your age." Margaret smiled gently. "We're handling it better than you might think, but we want to talk about helping you and your family." David shifted uncomfortably. "We don't want charity." "Good," Thomas said, "because we're not offering it. Here's what we're proposing. We'll pay off your mortgage and your credit card debt. Clean slate. That's about $230,000. David's eyes widened. "Dad, that's too much." "But," Thomas continued, "we're not just giving you cash for whatever comes next. Instead, we want to invest in your future. You've talked about starting your own consulting business for years. We'll provide seed capital, $50,000, but you'll work with a business advisor we'll pay for, and you'll create a real business plan." "You're giving us conditions?" David asked, not hostile, just surprised. "We're giving you structure," Margaret said. "The money's no good if it doesn't help you build something sustainable. We want you to succeed, not just survive." Rachel reached across and squeezed Thomas's hand. "That's incredibly generous and wise." They talked for 2 more hours, working out details, discussing David's business ideas, setting realistic timelines. By the end, David was excited in a way Thomas hadn't seen in years. "Dad," he said as they were leaving, "I'm proud of you, both of you. What you're doing with the foundation, how you're handling all this, it's remarkable. Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. We're trying to do right by everyone, including ourselves. Lisa came next, and her meeting was harder. She arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Her husband, Rick, wasn't with her. "Rick didn't want to come," she explained. "He's embarrassed. The business failed, Mum, completely. We lost everything." Margaret's heart broke. "Honey, we're here to help." "How can you help? We owe $300,000. The house is in foreclosure. Rick's credit is destroyed." She started crying. "I know I don't deserve help. I know I was only thinking about money when you first told us, but I'm desperate." Thomas pulled out a folder he'd prepared. "Here's what we're willing to do. We'll pay off your mortgage directly to the bank, about $210,000, and we'll pay the business debts another $90,000. That's $300,000 total, Lisa." She stared at him. "You're saving our house." "But," Margaret said gently, "there are requirements. Rick needs to get a regular job, not try another business venture right now. You both need to attend financial counseling sessions, and we're not paying for anything beyond this, not for at least 5 years. You need to learn to live within your means. And," Thomas added, "we want you to work for the foundation, part-time, helping with community outreach. We'll pay you a fair salary, $35,000 a year, but you have to actually work for it." Lisa wiped her tears. "You're giving me a job." "We're giving you a purpose," Margaret said. "You're good with people, Lisa. You always have been. Help us connect the museum with the community, organize events, build relationships. I don't know anything about museums. You'll learn. Dr. Chen will train you." Lisa broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. "I thought I'd ruined everything. I thought you hated me for only caring about the money." Margaret moved around the table and held her daughter. "We could never hate you. We're disappointed in some choices you've made, but we love you. We'll always love you. And sometimes love means helping you build a better life, not just paying for the one you have." Sarah's meeting was different. She came with her partner Jennifer, both of them successful professionals who'd never asked for anything. They met at the cabin, which Sarah wanted to see. She walked through the construction, marveling at the transformation, then sat on the porch with hot chocolate as the sun set over the mountains. "Mum, Dad," she said, "Jen and I talked, and we don't need financial help. We're doing fine, but we want to contribute to the foundation." Thomas was surprised. "Contribute?" "We want to endow a scholarship program," Jennifer explained, "through the foundation, for LGBTQ+ youth interested in history and museum studies, $50,000 a year in perpetuity." Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. "Sarah, that's beautiful." "Harrison was alone his whole life," Sarah said softly. "I wonder sometimes if it was because he couldn't be who he really was, the times he lived in, the expectations. I want to help kids who feel different, who love history and preservation, to have opportunities he never had." They talked late into the night, planning the scholarship, discussing criteria, imagining the young people who'd benefit. By the time Sarah and Jennifer left, Margaret felt a fullness in her heart she hadn't experienced in years. Her children were going to be okay, not because of the money, but because they were learning what really mattered. The museum opened on a brilliant Saturday in June, 18 months after Margaret and Thomas had first opened the vault. The town of Silver Creek had been transformed. The access road had been paved and widened. Parking lots had been built. A new welcome center sat at the base of the mountain, with shuttle buses running up to the cabin every 20 minutes. The general store had expanded. 2 new restaurants had opened. A small hotel was under construction. 3,000 people attended the opening day, far more than anyone had anticipated. They came from all over Colorado, from neighboring states, even from as far away as New York and California. Margaret stood at the entrance, greeting visitors, overwhelmed by the response. She wore a simple dress and comfortable shoes, her grey hair pulled back, her face lined but glowing with pride. Thomas gave the opening remarks, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke into the microphone. My uncle Harrison Reed spent his life collecting and preserving, but he forgot one crucial thing. These objects only matter when they're shared. My wife and I are honored to share Harrison's life work with all of you, and with generations to come. The governor spoke, praising their generosity. Dr. Chen gave a tour to reporters, highlighting key pieces in the collection. Sheriff Cooper, in his dress uniform, managed the crowd with grace and humor. But the moment that mattered most to Margaret came when a young boy, maybe 8 years old, stood transfixed in front of a display of Civil War artifacts. She approached him gently. "See something interesting?" He nodded, eyes wide. "My great-great-great-grandfather fought in the Civil War. My grandma told me stories, but I never saw anything real from that time. This is so cool. Would you like to know more about these items?" "Yes, please." Margaret spent 20 minutes with him, explaining each artifact, telling the stories behind them, watching his face light up with wonder. His parents stood nearby, filming on their phone, both of them misty-eyed. When the boy finally moved on, his mother approached Margaret. "Thank you. You just gave him a memory he'll carry his whole life." "That's why we built this," Margaret said simply. "For moments like that." The museum became a phenomenon. In its first year, it attracted over 120,000 visitors. School groups came from across the state. Historians published papers on items in the collection. The Discovery Channel filmed a documentary. But more importantly, it transformed Silver Creek. The population grew from 347 to over 900. Young families moved in, drawn by jobs at the museum and surrounding businesses. The school, which had been on the verge of closing, now had a waiting list. Property values increased, but the foundation worked with the town to ensure long-time residents weren't displaced. Earl, the gas station owner who'd first given them directions, retired and sold his business to a young couple from Denver. But before he left, he visited the cabin one last time. "You know," he told Thomas, "I never trusted Harrison. Thought he was crazy, maybe dangerous. But I was wrong. He wasn't crazy. He was just waiting for the right people to come along. And you folks, you were exactly right." The foundation expanded its mission beyond the museum. Using the annual returns on the endowment, they established several programs that Margaret had championed. The Veterans Assistance Fund provided financial aid to former military members facing hardship, a tribute to Harrison's brother, who died in World War II. The Mountain Education Initiative brought field trips to the museum for every school in 4 counties, completely free, including transportation. The Preservation Grant Program helped other small historical societies and museums across Colorado digitize their collections and improve their facilities. And Sarah's scholarship program brought 6 students a year to intern at the museum while pursuing degrees in history, museum studies, or cultural preservation. Lisa thrived in her role as community outreach coordinator. She organized events that brought people together: historical reenactments, lecture series, seasonal festivals. She built relationships with tribal leaders from nearby reservations, creating exhibits that told indigenous histories alongside settler narratives. "Mum," she said one afternoon, sitting in the museum office, "I never thought I'd love a job like this. I spent 20 years chasing money and success, and I was miserable. Now I'm making a fraction of what I used to, and I've never been happier." Margaret smiled, not saying, "I told you so," just squeezing her daughter's hand. David's consulting business was thriving too. He specialized in helping nonprofits optimize their operations, and the Reed Foundation had been his first client. He'd since expanded to work with museums and cultural organizations across the Southwest. "Turns out," he told Thomas over the phone, "watching you and Mum navigate this whole thing taught me more about business than any MBA program could have. You didn't panic, you didn't rush, You just made thoughtful decisions and trusted good people. That's the advice I give all my clients now." Thomas felt a swell of pride. His children were finding their own paths, building their own legacies. But the moment that truly completed the circle came 2 years after the museum opened. A couple in their late 60s drove up to the cabin one afternoon, their car packed with belongings. They'd been living in their vehicle for 3 months after losing their home to medical debt. They'd heard about the museum, used their last $20 for admission, and sat in the theater watching the film about Harrison's life and the creation of the foundation. Afterward, they approached Margaret, who was working in the gift shop. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice rough with emotion, "we don't mean to bother you, but we saw in the film that you and your husband were struggling before you inherited all this." "That's true," Margaret said gently. "We're struggling now. We've lost everything. And I guess we just wanted to see proof that things can turn around, that there's still hope." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She excused herself, went to her office, and called Thomas. 30 minutes later, they sat with the couple in a quiet corner of the museum. Their names were Frank and Doris Williams. Frank had been a carpenter until arthritis made it impossible to work. Doris had worked retail until the store closed. Their savings had evaporated during Frank's surgery and recovery. "We're not asking for money," Doris said quickly. "We just needed to talk to someone who understands." "How much do you owe?" Thomas asked. Frank hesitated. "Medical bills about $65,000. We'll never pay it off." Thomas and Margaret exchanged glances. They discussed this possibility, planned for it even. "Here's what we can do," Margaret said. "The foundation has a hardship fund for situations exactly like this. We'll pay your medical debt directly to the hospital." Doris gasped. "You can't! That's too much!" "And," Thomas continued, "we're renovating the old bunkhouse on the property, turning it into employee housing. It's small, 1 bedroom, but it's yours if you want it. Rent-free in exchange for Frank helping with maintenance around the museum and Doris working in the gift shop 20 hours a week." Frank started to cry. "Why would you do this for strangers?" "Because 3 years ago we were you," Margaret said. "We were barely surviving, invisible, forgotten. And then we were given a chance. We can't help everyone, but we can help some. And maybe you'll pay it forward someday too." 6 months later, Frank and Doris were thriving. Frank's hands might not have been steady enough for fine carpentry, but he could fix fences, maintain trails, and teach woodworking classes to visiting school groups. Doris became beloved by visitors for her warm smile and encyclopedic knowledge of the museum's collection. "They saved our lives," Doris told a reporter who was doing a follow-up story on the museum's impact. "Not just financially, but spiritually. They gave us purpose again." That story led to more people reaching out, more requests for help. The foundation established formal criteria, hired a social worker to vet applications, and helped 3 more families over the next year. It wasn't a solution to poverty or inequality, but it was something. Ripples spreading outward from one act of generosity. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Thomas and Margaret held a small celebration at the museum. Their children and grandchildren came, along with close friends and foundation staff. Sheriff Cooper, now retired but still a regular presence around Silver Creek, gave a toast. 3 years ago, these 2 people inherited a fortune. But what they really inherited was a choice, to be defined by money or to define what money could mean. They chose the latter, and our entire community is better for it. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Thomas and Margaret walked down to the vault. They rarely went there anymore. It was now a controlled space that only Dr. Chen and her team accessed, but they had permission for tonight. They descended the stairs, now well lit and climate-controlled, into the chamber that had changed their lives. The collections were mostly gone, distributed across the museum's displays, but the space itself remained, a reminder of Harrison's obsession and their transformation. Margaret ran her hand along the wall where the gold bars had once been stacked. "Do you ever regret it, giving away half?" Thomas shook his head. "Not for a second. We have more than we'll ever need. The rest is doing more good out there than it ever would sitting in a bank account." "What do you think Harrison would say if he could see what we've done?" Thomas thought about that. "I think he'd be amazed. Maybe a little horrified at first, all these people touching his precious collection. But ultimately, I think he'd understand. He was alone because he chose to be, but he didn't want us to make the same mistake." They stood in silence, listening to the hum of machinery keeping the vault at perfect temperature, even though it now held only memories. "We should go," Margaret said finally. "The grandkids are staying over tonight." As they climbed back up into the cabin, now transformed into a world-class museum, Margaret paused at the top of the stairs. "Thomas, do you remember that first night we arrived? How terrified we were. How we sat in bed wondering if this was real." "I remember. It was real. But it wasn't the cabin or the money that changed us. It was the choice we made about what to do with it." He kissed her forehead. "Best choice we ever made." They locked up the museum and drove to their new home, a modest house they'd built on the edge of the property. Not a mansion, not an estate, just a comfortable 3-bedroom with a porch that overlooked the mountains. Their grandchildren were already asleep in the guest rooms. David and Rachel were staying in town at the new hotel. Lisa and Rick were in the bunkhouse with Frank and Doris, all of them sharing dinner and stories. Sarah and Jennifer were flying in tomorrow morning. Margaret and Thomas sat on their porch in rocking chairs, wrapped in blankets against the cool mountain night. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Margaret asked. "What's that?" "That we got to do this together. Some couples, this kind of stress would have torn them apart. But it brought us closer." Thomas reached over and took her hand. "We survived 49 years of poverty together. Why wouldn't we survive 3 years of wealth?" She laughed. "Good point." In the distance, they could see the museum, its lights glowing softly in the darkness. Tomorrow, 500 visitors would walk through its doors. Children would press their faces against display cases. Adults would read the stories, see the artifacts, and leave with a sense of connection to history. And somewhere in all of that, Harrison's lonely obsession had been transformed into something communal, something healing, something that brought people together instead of isolating them. "Do you think he's watching?" Margaret wondered. "Wherever he is?" "I think he's resting," Thomas said, finally at peace, knowing his life's work survived him. They sat until the stars came out, brilliant and countless in the clear mountain air. Somewhere down in Silver Creek, Dottie's general store was closing for the night. Earl was probably telling stories to anyone who'd listen. Sheriff Cooper was having dinner with his grandchildren, and 3 families who'd been on the edge of losing everything were sleeping soundly, safe and secure because 2 people had chosen generosity over greed. Anyone can inherit wealth, but it takes wisdom to inherit responsibility. Margaret and Thomas Reed hadn't just received money and objects from a reclusive uncle. They'd received a test, a burden, and an opportunity. They could have hoarded it all, protected it, lived in fear and isolation like Harrison had. They could have spent it all, indulged themselves and vanished into comfortable anonymity. Instead, they'd chosen the harder path, sharing it, preserving it, using it to build something that would outlast them both. The cabin that Harrison built in 1887 still stood strong on its mountain ridge. The collection he'd assembled over 6 decades was now educating thousands. The fortune he'd hidden was now transforming lives. And the 2 people who'd arrived at that cabin with nothing but questions and fear had discovered something Harrison never had, that the true value of wealth isn't measured in dollars or gold bars, but in the number of lives it touches and the legacy it leaves behind. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, Thomas and Margaret finally went inside. They checked on their sleeping grandchildren, locked the doors, and climbed into bed in the modest master bedroom. "Tomorrow," Margaret said sleepily, "we're taking the grandkids to see the new exhibit, the one about women's suffrage." Lisa said it's beautiful. She did good work on it. "All our kids did good," Thomas said. "Despite everything, they turned out okay." "More than okay. They're finding their purpose, just like we found ours." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what? We're rich, not because of the money in the bank or the investments Caldwell manages. We're rich because we have each other. We have family that's healing, and we have work that matters." Margaret turned to face him in the darkness. "When did you become such a philosopher?" "Around the same time you became a museum curator and community organizer." She laughed, the sound filling their small bedroom with warmth. "We've come a long way from that apartment in Wisconsin. And we've got a lot of road ahead still." They fell asleep holding hands. Two people who'd been tested by poverty and tested by wealth, and who'd passed both tests not through luck or intelligence, but through love, partnership, and an unwavering commitment to doing right by others. The story of Harrison Reed's hidden fortune would be told for generations. Documentaries would be made, articles written, books published. But the real story wasn't about the money. It was about the two ordinary people who'd transformed an inheritance into a legacy, a secret into a gift, and isolation into community. Because in the end, wealth isn't what you have, it's what you do with what you have. And Margaret and Thomas Reed had done something extraordinary. They'd turned $260 million worth of hidden treasure into something priceless: hope, connection, and proof that even the most broken things can be restored if you have the courage to share them with the world. The end. Up next, two more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the greatest inheritance isn't money, it's the wisdom to use it well.